I organized a rebellion against the professor in my political science class. This was about 10 plus years ago when I had returned to the local university to finish my bachelor's degree in political science. The preface. I was a non-traditional student, so I was a little older and little more willing to question things. I was taking a 3000 level political science course, so it designed was for Policy majors and was required for my Policy degree. It was a fairly basic political science course, but the professor did some weird things. Specifically, there was a quiz every class over the assigned reading. These quizzes made up a significant part of the grade. But here's the tricky part. He seemed to be doing some sort of experiment with the wisdom of crowds. 1. The setup. The correct answer for a quiz question was the answer that was given by the most students in the class. A plurality. Whether it was based in fact or not, whatever the most students said was the answer was the correct answer. For example, if the question was, what year was the U.S. Constitution ratified? Even thought he factually correct answer would 1789. If the majority of people chose 1776, then 1776 was the right answer and you got credit for your answer. If you chose 1789, you were wrong and didn't get credit. This forced you to make a decision. Try to be factually accurate or try to figure out what the crowd was going to do and go with that. Neither guaranteed you a correct answer. 2. The majority of the time, the majority of students would actually choose the factually correct answer. But if it was a common misconception, or the question was poorly worded, then that could lead to a situation where the crowd was wrong. But here's what drove me nuts. 1. I was not willing to make my grade dependent on whatever the other students thought might be the correct answer. 2. My grade became dependent on conforming to what the crowd said was true. I had no real control over my grade since the wisdom of the crowd could be anything. 3. A class of 30 students was probably not a large enough crowd to give you a good example of the wisdom of crowds. 4. Learning the material was not the point. Conforming to the crowd was what got you a good grade. Cue malicious compliance and rebellion. I figured out that if we all agreed to choose the same answer for every question, then we could all guarantee ourselves a perfect score on the quiz. In reality, I only needed a plurality of people to go along with my plan. As long as I could muster enough votes for an answer, then we could control our destiny. It didn't matter if A was the correct answer or not. If we controlled the votes, we controlled our grades. And anyone who didn't go with us, they were going to fail regardless of if their answer was actually correct or not. I met everyone at the door to the classroom and explained the plan. For every question, we are going to choose the first option. If it's multiple choice, it's option A. If it's true, false, we are choosing true. If we all agree to this, then we can all get perfect scores. If you decide to go against us, your answer will be wrong. 3. The first class we did this, the professor figured out after a few questions that we were gaming the system. He had us redo the quiz and graded us on the factually correct answers. After the second class we did this, the professor changed the rules. There were 2 answers that would get you full points: the factually correct answer, and whatever answer the majority agreed upon. Results. In the end, I was okay with this arrangement. I could study and give the correct answer without being penalized for not conforming to the crowd thinking. Or if I made the same mistake as the majority of people, then I still got credit for it and it was a good discussion point for the class. Yes, I got an A in the class. I'm not sure if the professor ever figured out who organized the rebellion, but I did end up working with him in grad school and we got along just fine. Afterward, I always wondered, Did he do this to teach us about the power of grassroots organizing? It might not have been his intention, but he turned me into a leader even though I never wanted to be one. I organized a campaign to overthrow bad leadership, and we created a new regime where truth and discourse were both valued. And we learned that a plurality of voters can determine the path forward even if they are not the majority. P.S. This whole scheme was flawed and subject to the tyranny of the majority. I'm not sure how he didn't see this. It seems pretty basic to me. One, or maybe he was trying to teach us about game theory. I never did figure that out. 2. And let's be honest. If you knew the right answer, trying to figure out what the majority of people would do is a losing proposition. You knew the answer, so trying to figure out how the majority of people could get a question wrong forced you to think opposite to what got you to the correct answer in the first place. 3. Not 100% accurate, but close enough. In a sense, we were randomizing the correct answers. So anyone who wasn't going along with our plan could really only hope for 2,530% correct answers. Assuming that the distribution of factual answers was random. That would have driven me up the wall. That's like taking what should be individual work and mixing in all the worst parts of group projects. Good for you for taking a stand and exploiting the system. Okay, that was a really interesting read. Thank you for that one. I wonder if this was really an experiment by the professor. Because if it was, why force you to retake that first exam? And why adjust the rules afterwards? You just figured out how the cronyocracy works. Get those in charge to do your will, to benefit you, while screwing over those who expect honest government. In politics, the cronyocracy does this by buying politicians. A group of people get together and say, we're going to give our money to this politician instead of another. Of course, the professor wound up having to allow both factually correct and popular answers to pretend that the cronyocracy did not influence him. Just like real life, where government throws enough services at the people to get them to think the government works for them, when in reality, it works for the cronyocracy. Here's a bone for you, they say loudly while silently throwing stakes at the cronies. I would have either asked him directly what his reasoning for this was, or dropped the class. Either way, I would have probably gone over his head to protest a class where this was being done. That is a very confusing thing to do if you make grades depend on it. If it's a fun quiz for fun and science, then yeah, sure, make the rules like that. But if it's for grades, you're just actively punishing people for learning the correct answers. Good compliance. Love this. But it baffles me that you had to do it to begin with. Reminds me of an episode of The Paper Chase where the law professor created an impossible scavenger hunt. The students realized they could only win by all working together with written agreements to share what they found. The class was about contracts. This is certainly an entertaining application of game theory. Having just finished a class on it, but having your grade dependent on the setup would be completely brutal. The result should have been obvious to the professor from the get-go. Collusion was the only equilibrium outcome. Yeah, I had a professor pull something like this in some class years ago. Pulled the prisoner's dilemma as a rule 3/4 of the way through an activity, actively changing how we were supposed to be working just before the activity was done. Maybe he had a good lesson in mind, but he fumbled it so bad that it came off as a power play. So left and dropped the class right after. That's terrible. I love what you did to work the system that the professor set up. I wish you'd got the chance to ask him what in the heck he was actually thinking by doing this. And I love that you got the benefit of learning to organize. This scoring is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. As an engineering student, I would have been beating down the dean's door demanding to be able to drop this ridiculous course. I sure hope that professor was doing that on purpose to teach a political lesson. Sounds pretty clever if that's the case. Flashing back to my high school French class where we got our individual quiz grade and the average grade of everyone in our randomly assigned group, usually by Jolly Rancher flavor. For homework, we were to review in a group and turn in one person's paper. Again, random draw, which meant the kid next to me didn't do a dang thing. I was screwed. As a senior who'd run out of Spanish classes and was in beginning French with freshmen, I was panicked for the impact to my GPA. The only answer was that I needed to learn to work on a group. Needless to say, I stopped French after that course. At the end of the course, I was told anyone who worked with me had an improvement in their grades. I wonder why? I would have gone straight to the administration to protest the first time I encountered it. Once the professor said he'd not change his ways. Grading on a non-objective standard is horribly unfair, especially to neurodivergents who have less ability to infer what normal people, the masses, will choose. Isn't it a bit unethical to run experiments on people without their knowledge or consent? You discovered the microcosm of politics in that class. Reading this, I wonder if what you did wasn't exactly what he wanted. I dunno, this seems like as good a way as any to demonstrate how politics works in general. If he really wanted more accurate data with regards to group thinking, he would have been better off handing out multiple versions of the same test at random so all multiple choice questions were different. With a little technological planning, this wouldn't make much extra work for him if he did it frequently, which sounds like he did. There's a good chance he already knew that though, and that this was entirely intentional. This reminds me of tragedy of the commons versus collective action. There might be a fun activity to develop based on this idea. As it is, this professor half-baked this entire concept. Nice work. I'd only give correct answers. If graded poorly for correct answers, I'd escalate the issue as far as necessary within the system. And then without training students to lie and to capitulate to lies and unfairness is unforgivable. How are we supposed to get honest politicians out of such a system?
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Heracast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.